Hello, I'm Grant from Maker's Vlog, and today we're going to be starting to put some security in place on our dummy network. And the first thing that we're going to do is put in a firewall. And so I'm going to step through installing that and a little bit of configuration, but I'm not going to get into defining rules too much because that will bounce on to other things that we'll be doing to further secure the network. So this is mostly going to be around installing and doing that sort of initial configuration. So you might be able to see here, PFsense, I already have it built and this is now running. Sort of a here's one I made earlier scenario. But I'm going to spin up another virtual machine, actually step you through the initial setup. And then we're going to blow that away and then actually look at the PFsense that's running at the moment. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, PFsense is an open source firewall software. Actually, I'm not entirely sure it's completely open source, but it's free to use. You can download it and use it. There's no penalties that way. But I think you can't actually. I couldn't make a firewall using PFSense software and sell it, I believe is where the limitation is, whereas some other open source things you can do that under that license. So it's free to use and it will run on pretty much any hardware. If you have an old computer sitting about or anything like that, you can use that. You can't quite get it running on a Raspberry Pi ish. There are people who might disagree with me on that. For anyone who doesn't know, a Raspberry Pi is something like that. It's a little single board computer, and it's just a small compact computer. Very cool things, and I got a lot of projects going on with these, and people love making network devices out of them. But PFSense doesn't quite run on it easily. I think that there are a few things out there that will let you do it, but it doesn't quite work. But an old laptop or an old PC, anything like that, the only thing that you need to make sure that you have is two Ethernet connections. And that's because you'll have one that's going out to the internet, and then the other one that's going to your internal network. So you want to make sure that it has two. And most PCs in general, will be able to take a PCI card, so a little expansion card that you can plug in, and it'll give you a lot of extra Ethernet ports. So it's not a big deal if the computer that you're looking at doesn't necessarily have one. In this case, we're making a virtual one. So it works exactly the same, and I think you could get away with doing this on an actual business network. I'm not sure whether people do this. Any firewalls I've seen in an infrastructure environment, it's always a standalone appliance. It's its own thing. But I'm doing this virtually just because it's the easiest way for me to do it. But I don't actually see too many reasons as to why this could be bad, apart from the fact that it's on the virtual machine host. So if that virtual machine gets compromised, say the actual virtualization software, so the VMware ESXI, if it's compromised, if it's vulnerable, then you've got a problem, because then they could potentially get control of your firewall and bring it down. So that is a drawback, and that's a consideration that you'd need to take into account. But it depends. So I'm doing this virtually, and we'll see how it goes. So let's actually get into the configuration. If you're doing this in ESXi or in any form of virtualization, you'll need to set up two networks. You'll need to make sure that you've got two networks, two virtual networks on your virtualization software, and that's so that you can actually have those two ports, the one that's going out to the internet and the one that's going to the internal network. And I've already done this, but I will show you how it works. So if you look here, you can see physical NICs. Sorry if I went a bit fast there. I went to networking and then here to physical NICs. And this just shows me what physical adapters I have. In this case, you can see I've got 4, only 2 of which are plugged in. And that's VM NIC 0 and VM NIC 2. Honestly, I just plugged in whatever I could reach around the back of the machine rather than trailing it out, so that's why they're plugged in there. But the first thing you need to do is make a virtual switch, and you do that just by clicking Add Virtual Switch. You give it a name. The MTU doesn't matter too much, and then you pick a virtual or a physical network adapter to associate this with. And as far as I understand it, in VMware ESXi, you need to have a physical adapter that it connects to. But most servers have multiple network adapters, so that's not a problem. In this case, I won't. And you can see here I have WAN, which is wide area network, and it's going out VM-NIC2, and that's actually then physically plugged into my other firewall. So I have a firewall already set up in between this network and my home network, and it's my basically my protection to protect my home network, because I'll be doing some things in this infrastructure, and I'll be doing a lot of potentially dodgy things, maybe with malware, stuff like that. So I want to make sure that I've got an extra layer of protection that's explicit just to protect my home network. So that's what that's going out to. And then in here you can see it goes to the PFsense machine. And the other networking we've got is server LAN. And as you can see, we've got all of our machines on there. And that goes out to another NIC, which goes to a switch, because I actually have these connected to Red, my other physical server. So that's why I have it going actually out to another connection. You will also note that under this, you can see virtual machines. It's also got the PFsense, okay, because it's plugged into both. So you need to make sure that you have them set up in the virtual switch, and then you need to do the same in port groups. So you'll need to make the virtual switch first to say server LAN and WAN, or LAN and WAN, whatever way you want to name it. Basically an external interface and an internal interface. And then in here you assign the port groups, and this is what you actually give to the virtual machine whenever you're creating it, to say this is what I want you to have. These two, the management network and VM network, the VM network is now redundant, and the management network is how I'm connecting to these servers. And I've got a bit of a bypass in the firewall so that I can get in this way, so that no matter what rules I put in place, for the most part, on the PFsense machine, it won't deny me access onto this. This is controlled by my other firewall, and I've made sure that I'm allowed to get in. This is default. It's on VMware by default. You always have this one. And then these are the two port groups that we've made effectively, and it's as simple as, so you give it a name, you can give it a VLAN, which we'll be getting into later on, and then you can assign it to a virtual switch as well. Okay, so that's setting up the networking. That's all done and dusted for us. And if I go into virtual machines, and what we're going to do is we're going to create this a PFsense box, but a dummy one, obviously, because I already have one here. But I'm going to run through the initial setups. So we're going to create a new virtual machine. And this is this particular part is obviously only if you're doing this on ESXI or some other virtualization software. It'll be a similar setup, but if you're installing this just on a computer, you'll install it onto a flash drive, USB drive, CD, whatever, and then install it as if you were like installing Windows or some other operating system on that machine. It's fairly straightforward that way to get to the next steps. So we're going to give it a name. In this case, I'm going to call it PFsense 2. And the guest OS family is other, and it is FreeBSD64. Okay, so its compatibility is 6.5 virtual machine. That's because that's the ESXi version I'm using. OS family, it's other, and then FreeBSD. We go in here. This is just set up storage, so we can just hit next. That's fine. Customize settings. Okay, so in here we're going to add a network adapter, and we are going to do WAN. So you can see here we now have two network adapters, network adapter 1 and new network adapter. You can rename that if you want. And we have one connected to the WAN, one connected to the server LAN. Don't worry if you forget about this step or miss it, or you maybe misconfigure this, because you can change these later on. As far as that, the memory and the space and the CPU is all fine. 1 gig is ample for PFsense. And if we go here to the CD drive, we want to use a data store ISO file. And in my data store, I've got ISO files here, and here's the PFsense installer. And you can get this from the PFsense website. I'll put a link in the description as to where you can get that. And I've just put it into my data store so that it's easily accessible. And we'll next that. This just gives you a summary, which is fine. And we'll wait for that to make. Shouldn't take too long. There we go. Okay, now going to run through the install. So I'm just going to open this up, which will also start the machine. And you can see PFsense starting to load. Let's make that a wee bit bigger as well. Okay, so now we're actually into the installer, and it's fairly straightforward. This is just telling you, yeah, as I said earlier, you can't commercially distribute this, so you can't sell a device with this on it. And you've got a couple of different options. In this case, we're going to install and put in your what type of keyboard you're using. Usually this is what location you are in the world. And we shall continue. Okay, so now we can do a guided disk setup or a manual disk. Just go for guided. It's the simplest way to do it, and there's not much reason to do otherwise. Unless you're doing like dual booting and stuff like that, which, yeah. So we'll just wait for that to finish. Okay, now that's done, it's now asking if we want to make any final manual configuration changes before we do a reboot or before we exit the installer. In this case, I would just say no, it's fine, and let it reboot. Okay, and that is it now started. It will automatically try and configure what it thinks to be the WAN and what it thinks is the LAN interface. It will try and work it out automatically, and it's pretty good at doing that. You can actually see here that it's done it correctly. So you can see that the WAN, it's picking up through DHCP, which it's alright in this case, and it's got 10.0.1.21/24, and that IP range is in the range from the firewall that is sitting between this network and my home network. It's anything on the inside of it is the 10.0.1 range, and so it's gotten an IP address from that firewall because it recognizes that that's my way out to the internet, which is what the WAN is effectively. It's your way out to the internet or to other networks. Slight problem here though, you can see that LAN, and it's given the IP range of 192.168.1.1, which is fine for the inside usually, but in my case, my home network is actually using that same IP range. So if I was using this as is, I would need to change that, because if I had multiple things of having the 192.168.1. say 101, it could cause a lot of confusion on the network and cause issues. So I would need to change that and configure that, and I'll show you how to do that now. So you can see here that we have a series of commands that we can do. It's numbered 0 to 16. And one of them is, it's quite simple, set interface's IP address, and that's what we're going to do. Oh, click into it. So we do 2. You can see here that now the WAN is DHCP, which for me is fine, but depending on how your network may be configured, you might want to set that to static. And in some cases, if it doesn't automatically pick up what sits outside interface, you need to go in and do this effectively and manually type in what the outside interface looks like. In this case, though, we're going to go to the LAN, and we want to give it a new IPv4 address. In this case, we'll do 10.0.3.0. Actually, sorry, tell a lie, that needs to be 1. And this is now asking for the subnet mask, which, not to get into networking and IP ranges, but it sort of denotes how many IP ranges are in this network. The most common one that you'll see is the top one there, the 255.255.0. And that basically means that in the IP range that we've put in, the 10.0.3.1, what that's saying is that the 10, the 0, and the 3 are network bits. And anything after that, so the .1 to dot whatever, they're all in the same network. So I could have I could have up to 254 machines in that, and I wouldn't run out of IP addresses. But anything that's on, say, .4 or .1 or .2 or 192 whatever else, they're on different networks. There are far better ways to explain that, and if anyone wants me to go into my IP address and then how that works, let me know in the comments, and I'll go into it in better detail. But for this, generally speaking, just do 24, and you're not going to go too far wrong. Okay, so for this bit, it's now asking for a gateway address, an upstream gateway address, basically the way out to the internet. This is a LAN interface, so we don't need to do this, but if you were setting up a WAN, that's when you would then put in probably if you have a modem, which is the most common way of you getting the internet into a business, you would have its IP address on this thing so that it knows to get out to the internet, I need to go this way. Because we're in a LAN, we can just go enter for none. IPv6, don't worry about it, you can just hit enter. It's a whole other kettle of fish. And you want to enable DHCP server on this LAN. Generally speaking, yes, I would. If you've seen the other videos, you'll know that the DC server can do DHCP and stuff like that. Generally, I would like to keep it on the firewall and let it hand out IP addresses, so I generally go yes in this case. But if you are using something else for DHCP, like a domain controller, then you would change this to no. Now you enter in the start of the IPv4 range. So basically, you can now dictate how many IP addresses this can hand out of the block that you've already got. So in this case, as I said before, this is a /24 address. So I have 254 IP addresses that I can that the server can hand out. And I can say, do you know what, only actually hand out between this range. And the reason you would do that is if you have static IP addresses. So, say you want IP addresses from 2 to 10, you want to keep them because you're going to assign them out manually to other things. So you can tell this at this point to say, okay, only give out IP addresses from 11 onwards. And then the end address. Nope. In this case, 10.0.3.254. It's just asking about the web configurator protocol. To be honest, just keep it as yes. And then it will go through, save the changes, and restart the services. Okay, now that's done, it's actually telling you here, you can see that it's saying that if you want to go to the web interface, which is how you'll mostly administer this server, it's giving you the URL that you need to go to, in this case HTTP, and then the IP address of the box. Now we're not going to go on to that because it won't work right now, because I have, you need to set up other routing, just because I'm outside that network, I need to set things up to allow me in, which we're not going to do in this one because this is a dummy box. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to move over to the other one that I already set up. So here's the one that I made earlier. And you can see that the WAN and LAN IPs are different. The 10.0.1.20 is the WAN interface for this firewall, which is its interface on the other firewall. And the LAN in this case is 10.0.2.1. And so anything on the inside, so basically any servers and stuff that I have in there will have a 10.0.2. something IP address. This will be getting changed later on as we go into it, starting to use VLANs and splitting things down that way. But at least for the meantime, that's the IP range that we're working with. Now, for the most part, we don't actually administer it from this console. And whenever it's created, it'll tell you that, yeah, you've seen it in the last one where it says, go to the web configurator, which is just the IP address that you see there on the LAN, the 10.0.2.1. And I've already got that open here. So if we go to it, this is it here. So you can see at the top there, 10.0.2.1. In this case, it's HTTPS, and you can see it crossed out there. Whenever you do this, it will actually be HTTP. You have to change it to say it's HTTPS. The reason that I've had to change it to say HTTPS is because I'm actually accessing this from outside the network. So effectively, I'm coming in from the outside of that firewall as far as it's concerned. And so I had to do a few configuration changes to allow me in to access it from this machine. Otherwise, what I would have had to do is connect to a machine in the network and then come back out to the firewall from its internal interface. Don't worry about it. It can get a bit complicated when you think about it like that, but just bear with me that's why. And so this is PFsense. I've also changed the theme, which I'll actually just show you how to do because I think it looks a little bit nicer. So it's system general setup, and then if you scroll down, you can see here themes, and the standard one is PFsense, which is just like a white background in blue. I quite like the dark one. I just think it's a bit easier on the eyes. You can also set up your domain and the host name. Also, the first time you actually connect to this, you'll actually go through this, which is, it will do this by default. It's the setup wizard, and I'm not going to run through it all, but basically it will step through actually setting this up as a basic firewall. It's not complicated. It's just a next, finish. The only real things that you'll set up is like this, where you say domain, depending on whether you actually have a domain, depends whether you need to put anything in there. As you've seen before, my DC, my domain controller is makervlog.local, is the fake domain that I've made. So that's what I stuck with. Host name, you can call it whatever you want. This is just the name of the firewall and the domain. Your DNS servers, in this case, I've told it to use my other firewall, and the DNS server, or sorry, the DC. I've told it to use it as a DNS as well. And you can add in as many or as little as you like. Generally speaking, if you put in a DNS server of 8.8.8.8, which is Google's, you'll be fine. It will work, no problem. You'll also set up, a couple of time zones and other a few bits and pieces like that. That will set up the web interface for you. Now, whenever we go in here, you will see here firewall and rules. And this is where we actually set up the rules of the firewall, and I will go through and sort of step through these in another video, because it depends very much on your setup as to what rules you would want in here. And the rules that we put in place to defend our mock network is going to change as we go through. The first thing that you'll notice is here. This will not be here by default. I have put this in. And this is a rule that effectively allows everything to talk to everything else. It's very, very bad. You should not have a rule like this. I've put this in for demonstration purposes. You should never have a rule like this, ever. Basically, this is saying that all of your stuff, all of your firewall rules, everything else are ignored. Your best practice should be at the bottom. So these rules are done in order. It checks against one and then the other and then the other. And the sort of best practice is at the very bottom, you should have an implicit deny. So you should allow by exception. So basically say this is allowed, this is allowed, this is allowed, anything else, block it and deny access. So I will go through and add in various rules and stuff, and again I'll do another video and sort of show how I've set it up and the reasoning behind them. But for now I'll just do a quick rule just to show you. So you can see here you've got add above, add below. We'll just add below. Select what you want to do, pass, block, or reject. Usually pass or block is fine. Disable rules, so you can actually have this rule is disabled as soon as you make it, and then you can go in and re-enable it later on if you want. You select the interface that you want it to apply to, so either your external or internal interfaces. Address family, generally IPv4 or IPv4 plus IPv6. Generally IPv4 is fine. You're not going to use IPv6 that much inbound. The protocol that you want to use, so TCP, UDP, ICMP is pings, essentially. They're pinging packets. Generally speaking, you want to do TCP, UDP. 9 times out of 10 that'll cover whatever protocol you're actually using, but depending on what you're doing, you may need to use a specific protocol. So the source, so where the information is coming from, you can define where you want to filter it from. So in this case, say it was going from the LAN to the WAN, which is what we'll do. We'll say from the LAN network, and then the destination to the WAN net. So basically anything from that going to there. Destination port range, if you want to be very specific and define a port, you can. So a good example here is HTTP and HTTPS, which is ports 443 and 480, and 443 and ports 80, which is your internet traffic essentially. So we'll put 443 in there. Then you can also define logging. So anytime something matches on this, you can log it. Generally, this you would more do with either troubleshooting. So say you have you're trying to connect to something and it's not working correctly. You can turn on logging on the rule and see whether the information is flagging on the rules that you expect it to. Other than that, you might put this on if you have some specific denies. If there's some particular traffic that you're watching out for. If you know that, let's say, you should not have any traffic on HTTP. You should not have any port 80 traffic at all on your network. There shouldn't be any. You can actually set a rule up to deny that traffic and also log it, and then that way you're aware of whenever anything happens. So there also are some advanced options in here. I'm not going to get into them. They're not that important for most rules. So we'll hit save on that. And we now have this allow rule. It's a bit redundant at the minute because, as you can see, above it is a rule that allows everything anyway. But this is going to be part of the series of rules I'm going to be putting in to actually make this a realistic firewall. And as I said, I'll come back and review them in another video. But an important thing, whenever you change the config, you have to click apply changes. I have done this before many times where you've went in and made loads of changes and I haven't clicked apply changes and it's forgotten the rules. So we hit apply. And last thing we're going to look at is the dashboard. This is the main page that you would usually look at, and it's got some metrics around CPU usage, memory utilization, things like that. And it also gives you interface health that you can then click into. So if we go into, let's say, the LAN, we've then got all of the information about the LAN that we can then go in, enable the interface, configure it, do things like that. And if we go to here, you can click related stats. And as you can see, it tells you how much packets in, speed, stuff like that, DNS servers that are linked to it, things like that. So I mean, that's it. That's the firewall in place. The default rules that are in on this are obviously better than what I've got here because of the this just letting everything go through for the meantime. So the default rules are a little bit better. There is quite a nice rule that you can't get rid of, this one here. LAN address anti-lockout rule. Basically that means that if you're in the internal network, it's very difficult for you to actually deny yourself access to this web page, which is a great feature because that's something that happens quite a lot whenever you're trying to work out which way round you should do the source and destination or things like that, especially if you're working on the command line putting rules in. It can get confusing and you end up locking yourself out. It's happened many times. So I mean that's it. That's the firewall setup. As I said, offline I'm going to go in, put a load of rules in, and once I've got that done, I'm then going to go in and talk you through sort of my reasoning behind the rules that I picked and why I've put them in. And then we're going to rip all those rules out as we change the structure of the network and make it more secure as well. It's going to be changing quite a lot as we go through, so don't worry, you'll get plenty of visibility of me chopping and changing rules out. So if there's anything else you want to see around the PFsense firewall, anything like that, let me know, put it in the comments below, all that good stuff. Remember to like, subscribe, and also finally I got the Patreon fixed. So it's now working. The Patreon is now back up and running after a while. The link's in the description. And all my videos are uploaded early there. It's basically as soon as I have finished editing them, they're uploaded there. You don't have to wait for the several weeks for them to come out. I usually release my videos on a Monday, and I'm usually about 3 weeks ahead of myself. I've got 3 weeks worth buffered. But on Patreon I put them right out there, and then there's also some just Patreon specific videos and stuff like that go on there. So if you're interested in that, check that out below. So yeah, thanks for watching.